purpose of this video is to talk about the shape of the sword, the shape of the hilt, what it does in my hand, and to show you a few of the motions when I'm moving it around and how it feels and what it does. And also, the purpose of this video is to explain the difference between a stab, a slash, and a hack. So this is the replica Kopis that I have. I'm going to talk about the hilt first. The hilt is really unusual because unlike other swords such as, European broadswords or other swords such as the Japanese katana, the hilt of the Kopis tapers away from the guard. So at the guard it swells maximally. What that does in my hand is that it actually forces my hand forward a little bit. So I'm trying to hold it upright, but if I hold it upright, you see it actually tilts forward a little bit. That extra rotation is enforced by this little protrusion on the handle. It anchors my fourth and my fifth finger below it, and my second and my third finger on top of it. And what that does is that if I swing it around or move it, my hand doesn't shift. Below, this pommel-like extension of the handle prevents my hand from slipping downwards, and on top, the guard prevents my hand from slipping upwards. So my hand is very, very secure when I'm holding it. Now I'm going to show you how to find a point of balance on a blade. This is also something you cannot determine without holding the sword. And there's really no scientific way to do this other than just to find it with your hand. And you can see the point of balance is not here at the guard, and it's not way out here like it would be for an axe. The axe has all of the weight right here at the end of the haft because that's where the head is. And stabbing swords usually have all of their weight concentrated here so that it's all held by the wrist and you can have very easy point control. But with a sword like this, it's about here, which is, for swords, relatively speaking, far away from the guard. What that does is it shifts the weighting forward. So it actually shifts it onto the center of percussion. So the design of the sword is pretty much perfect and ingenious. The hilt tilts my hand forward. The center of percussion is at the point of maximum swelling, so that's the first point of contact for two reasons, the hilt and the center of percussion. And because of the weighting of the sword, the maximum amount of force I can achieve without turning this blade into an axe is concentrated right where the center of percussion is and right where I'm going to hit when I strike an enemy. Now I'm going to talk about finding the center of percussion for the blade. So the center of percussion is the point on a sword where it's called the sweet spot, because when the sword strikes in a cut, it's the point where the sword encounters the least resistance and there's no vibration traveling back up into the hand. It cuts the easiest. So, and there's no easy way to determine this without holding the sword. So what you have to do is you take the sword and you start tapping it down the length of the blade until you reach a point where it bites very easy and it doesn't really vibrate in your hand. And that is how you determine where the center of percussion is. And on this Kopis, the center of percussion is about here, about basically right where the blade swells maximally. And that's very intelligent because that is actually the first part on the blade that encounters an enemy when you swing it. So if I swing downwards, the hilt forcing my hand to rotate and the center of percussion being right here, the first point of contact on an enemy when I cut is the center of percussion. So kind of by design, I'm going to get a very strong, powerful, easy cut every time I swing, purely by how the sword is made. So this is a wooden replica of a Xiphos that another classic student made a couple years ago. It's pretty accurate, and for the purpose of this thesis, I'm just going to use it as a stand-in for an actual replica Xiphos. So for my explanation of the difference between a stab, a slash, and a hack, I'm going to be using the replica Xiphos instead of the Kopis. And this is because I'm going to be demonstrating on my own arm, and if I were to do that with a Kopis, I would cut myself, and that would not be safe. So I'm going to use the Xiphos replica to talk about what a stab is. So a stab is kind of self-explanatory. It's a thrust. It's trying to create a straight line from the point to the guard and force that straight line into another person. It's really meant to force its way through, the abdomen or in between the ribs or downwards in between the clavicle and the scapula. The point is to go deep and to cut tissue within the body. The stab actually doesn't kill you. What kills you with a stabbing wound is when you pull out and you bleed out from massive internal bleeding and a great deal of external tissue damage. I'm going to use the Xiphos replica to talk about what a slash is. A slash is also called a draw cut. It's the idea of maximizing points of contact along the blade with your enemy's target. So it looks something like this, and the idea is, this is why backwards curving swords are so good for it. So a slash looks like this if you're going to hit someone. You see that motion, that drawing along the body. What that does is that the initial cut is here. It bites into the flesh, and as the backwards curve of the blade runs along that cut, it just cuts deeper, like a knife through butter, really. So as you do that, the purpose is not to break bones or to necessarily reach, deep tissue like the liver or the heart. The purpose of the slash is to open up a wound that bleeds very heavily, and also to maim. As you can probably imagine, if I hit someone here with a slash and draw along, I don't even need to hit very hard. As long as I cut deep, sever an artery or a tendon. If someone hits me along the knee and cuts like that, then they're going to cut the tendons and the ligaments in the back of my knee and maim me, running me a much, less skilled opponent for them to fight. So now I'm going to be demonstrating what a hack is using this replica Xiphos. Now, unlike the slash, the hack tries to maximize the percussive force of your strike on a single point on the blade, usually the center of percussion if you're doing it right. So the difference mainly is this. So a slash wants to bite initially and then cut to draw up a bleeding wound, but a hack just wants to strike. And it doesn't need, so a hacking sword doesn't need to be as sharp as a slashing sword. A slashing sword needs to bite initially and slice, but a hack is more like an axe. If it hits, it doesn't necessarily need to cut, because if I get hit here and I'm wearing armor, the force of the blow could be heavy enough to break my clavicle beneath my armor, which would, render my left arm useless and open me up for further counterattack. So a hack, it can be designed to batter through helmets, through a shield, can be designed to break bones, or just simply to lop off limbs. As you can see, a hack right here at my wrist would do a very good job of cutting through these thin bones, the radius and the ulna. So I'm going to demonstrate a stab with this wooden Xiphos. So it feels pretty natural in my hand to hold it like this, more of in a hammer grip. So what I'm going to do is I just stab forward. And that works. It's straight. I don't need to adjust for any curvature of the blade. It's very easy just to go straight. And I can do that with a shield too. Demonstrate from this angle. It wouldn't be difficult at all for me to stab with this, and it feels correct. So I'm going to demonstrate a slash with the Xiphos. So with a slash, the idea is, as I said, to do a draw cut. So I'm going to come down like this and bring it with my body. Now, this is a little awkward with a Xiphos, I must admit. It's a little awkward because the weighting here, kind of the heaviness located here, wants the blade to go forward. So it's hard to get that nice draw cut that I need for a slash with this. But by no means does that mean it's impossible to slash with a Xiphos. So now I'm going to demonstrate a hack with the Xiphos. Now, as I said with the hack, it has to come down and it has to finish about here. So if I hack with this, it's a little strange and it doesn't feel quite right because, as you can see, this pommel is actually preventing me from going farther, and the hammer grip only allows me to, cut about here. So it doesn't feel wrong, it just doesn't feel like it should. So now I'm going to demonstrate a stab with the Kopis. So this feels a little strange. So because of the Kopis' handle forcing my hand forwards and forcing the blade downwards, I have to adjust as I stab so I don't arc my strike. I have to kind of force my arm to keep it straight. And even then, at the end, there's a little drop. So I can't really aim it that well, and I can't get a handle on it, and I have to figure out a way to work with it. It's not very natural. It's perfectly serviceable, because the Kopis does bend back in a little S-curve at the very end, so there is a reinforced tip with a straight line from the tip to the guard. So it can stab. It's just a little strange to do it. So now I'm going to demonstrate a slash with the Kopis. This is very unnatural to do with this weapon, because it cannot actually slash. The design of the hilt, the swelling of the blade, and the forward curve actually force my hand and the blade forward. So, as I said before, the point of the draw cut is to maximize the amount of blade that actually cuts and doesn't force its way through an object. And I cannot do such a strike with this weapon because it actually forces my hand to cut, to bite, to hack. I cannot slash with the Kopis. So now I'm going to demonstrate a hack with the Kopis. Now this feels correct. There's not really another way to put it other than it feels correct. My hand wants to let the blade move forward. The forward curve actually increases, the chance of me hitting where I want to, and where I'm going to hit is going to be the center of percussion. The hack makes sense because that's exactly what the sword wants to do. The forward curve, the hilt, the blade, everything is designed so as to maximize the percussive force that hits right here on the center of percussion. So it's going to bite deep, and it's going to crunch whatever it hits. This is a hacking sword. Now I'm going to briefly explain what a reverse cut is. So a reverse cut is a second chance strike. If you swing and you miss, then a sword like a Xiphos, which is sharpened on both edges, if I miss, I can swing it back briefly and try to hit them with the back edge of the blade. So the front edge cuts, and if I miss, I can just try to nick him with the tip or with the back edge as I come back. So I swing, and then as I return, I can just try to get them in the jugular or something as I come back. So the reason I think for this last third of the back edge of the Kopis to be sharpened is perhaps for a reverse cut. So on a double-edged sword like a Xiphos, it's very easy to see how a reverse cut could work. You cut down, you miss, so you swing back and you try to nick them as you return to neutral, as you return to your guard. With the Kopis, you can do the same thing. If you swing and you miss, as you retreat, as you come back, you can try to nick them with the tip, maybe in the jugular or maybe under the arm. So you miss, you come back. It's not a very powerful strike. It's just to irritate, to wound, or to maim, if you can get a tendon or something. I'm just going to briefly talk about parries with the sword. Now, most of this is a little bit unnecessary because a hoplite would have had the massive aspis with him, so he wouldn't have needed to parry really with his sword, except in the case of he has the aspis in front of him and he sees a spear going for his comrade, so he needs to get that spear out of the way. The first parry I'm going to talk about is a stop parry. As you can imagine, it's self-explanatory. It arrests the motion of the opponent's weapon. So if they come down, if they're swinging with a sword, I block. It stops. If they're swinging with a spear, I hear. It stops. The second type of parry I'm going to talk about is a deflection parry. This is a little bit more complex to do, but it is much more effective, and it opens you up for counterattack. So, a deflection parry is just as self-explanatory as a stop parry. The stop parry was going to arrest the momentum completely of the opponent's strike, but a deflection parry is going to redirect it away from you. So if someone is chopping down at my head, what I can do is I can meet the blade here, as with a stop parry, but move it slightly, so that they pass over here, and now I can stab back at their eye, because their arm is now out here. Or, if I deflect them here, I can chop down at their wrist. Similarly, this really works for stabbing motions. If the opponent is trying to stab me with a spear, what I can do is I can meet the tip of the spear with my tip under it and simply lift it. So their spear goes ineffectively and harmlessly around my head, and now my blade is closer to them than their spear tip is to me, and they have to fully reset, and I can just continue.